What's up, guys, and welcome to another season of Spoken Truth. The NBA season is literally 7 days away, and there's so much to dive into on this first episode. Really, the biggest storyline coming into the season, and that's the trade that really happened at the tail end of on the cusp of the season. Damian Lillard is now a Milwaukee Buck. He was traded from Portland to Milwaukee. I want to start with Tunde. What was your initial thoughts this summer of seeing that transpired, that transaction, and what does that mean for the Milwaukee Bucks as far as title contentions in the East?
Well, first of all, I'm just glad that the whole saga is over. Um, this stuff exhausts me. A lot of the off season, the rumor mill. I love basketball. The rumor mill is kind of it is what it is. It's part of the business, I guess. But the more that we can all, enjoy basketball, talk about basketball, watch basketball, the better for me. So my initial thoughts were I'm glad this is over. I'm glad this whole thing is over. On Dame's behalf, I'm glad that he gets to play for a team that is genuinely trying to win and is going to be able to contend for a title. And in totality, I think the package that Portland got back is, pretty nice as far as them going forward and rebuilding. Obviously, that being a 3-team deal, they got a couple of they got a pick with 2 pick swaps. Obviously they got back Ayton. All that's nice. And then moved Jrue Holiday for assets. All nice. From the Milwaukee perspective, obviously it's a nice roster. Dame and Giannis pick and rolls are going to be deadly. I think everyone's really focused on that. And it's not just Dame, Giannis pick and roll. You're going to be able to surround them with, I don't know, let's say Brook Lopez and Malik Beasley and, Chris Middleton. There's just a lot of space on the floor, a lot to work with. One of the biggest issues that Milwaukee has is that they tend to bog down a little bit late game offense-wise. And in the half court, especially in the postseason, Damian Lillard is, I think, going to go a long way towards fixing that problem.
I kind of like the trade rumors at the beginning, when he first announces that, he wants to trade Miami Heat, become the favorite. And then it drags on for months and months and it gets a little tired. So I was happy to see it end too. I was surprised to see that it ended up being the Milwaukee Bucks. Obviously, we talked about it throughout the offseason and everybody else did as well, that the Miami Heat were the preferred destination and they were the assumed destination as well for most of the summer. You end up flipping it to the Milwaukee Bucks, which is, a team that the Heat are competing with to get to the finals year in and year out. I think the Bucks are a team now. They have Giannis. I think Dame is a seamless fit next to him. We saw them playing the preseason the other night. It was a little bit choppy at first. It is going to take a while, like it does when you add any player of Dame's caliber, but they're going to get it figured out. They're going to be just fine. Chris Middleton's going to get back in the mix as well. You got Brook Lopez, a little bit more depth, I feel like, than they had of past years. Jrue Holiday is going to be a significant loss on the defensive end, but I feel like Dame will bring much more on the offensive end where they'll be able to compete for a championship this year. I thought the package was better from Milwaukee than what Miami could have gave, and that's probably why the Blazers ended up doing it in the first place. They get DeAndre Ayton, like you mentioned. They get the 2029 first-round pick, as well as the 28 and 30 pick swaps. And then, like you mentioned, they flip Jrue Holiday. They bring in Robert Williams, another 2 first-round picks in the future, and then Malcolm Brogdon, who is another guy that they're probably going to be able to flip this offseason. So I think the Blazers really got, a deal that they liked rather than giving them to Miami, where that's where Dame wanted to go, but you probably would have had to take, Hero, Jovic, and maybe a couple picks, which isn't nearly as good as what they got. So I can totally understand why it went down from all angles.
The pick-and-roll dynamic between the two is going to be something really special because that's kind of what Giannis likes to run. That's something that Dame is familiar with running in Portland. So it seems to be a seamless fit with those two. And I think a lot of NBA fans think that when you put is not a quote unquote super team where you put superstars together that you're supposed to win it off the bat. Sometimes that's really not the case. We go down a list of quote unquote super teams or multiple stars on one team that really didn't win it that first year. The first one that comes to my mind is Miami. You know, they had the talent to beat the Mavericks, but they just didn't have kind of that mindset, who team is it, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of things could contribute to why a team don't win, although you might be the favorites to win it. And I'm glad that it's over from the beginning of the situation of, playing this cat and mouse game of, when is it going to happen? This team is interested. I've always been under, it didn't surprise me that Milwaukee was the team that eventually pulled the trigger because a lot of teams wasn't focused on maybe he can go to Milwaukee. But it was reported that Milwaukee was interested. But we all thought because of his preferred destination is Miami, that was the case. But what I've heard and what I've gathered is Milwaukee was always in those conversations, and that it never got to a point where Milwaukee was like, you know what, we're exiting the conversation for Damian Lillard. So it really didn't surprise me that he went. For Dame, is that are you okay with being the second best player? And I know, and that might sound like what winning the championship is, you know, is more important. But if you look at the circumstances that he wanted to be in Miami, he not only was he going to be a championship contending with Miami, not only was he going to go to a culture that he really enjoys and respects, but he was going to be without a doubt the best individual on that team. It was going to be his team. So now going to a team that's not yours,
Without a
um,
doubt.
no, I know without a doubt he's better than Jimmy Butler. I believe. I believe Damian Lillard is I believe Damian Lillard would have been the best player on that team.
Well,
Um,
there are doubts. There are doubts.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a doubt. I don't. I think it was going to be Damian Lillard's team. I think he was going to be the best player on that team. Now we could debate we can get into it later who's a better player, but from the second for the sake of this conversation, I do believe Dame was going to be the best player on that team. So he was going to have he was the best player on the team. Check. He was going to be in a state in the city that he loved. Check. And the culture that he enjoys. Check. The coach, Eric Spoelstra, who was an amazing coach, top 10 coach. Check. So he's checking off all of these boxes. The one box he really can't check off now in Milwaukee is that you know I'm playing with Giannis, but that's not such a bad thing. But you're not the best player. So how does Dame deal with the fact that he's not the best player on the team? That's one of the biggest things that I'm kind of looking forward to in this season is how does Dame adjust to being second fiddle when he's always been first?
I mean, to me, I feel like if he truly wants to win a championship, which is what he said for the last several years, then you would be okay being Giannis's sidekick, and that's no slight to Dame. I mean, you're
Which
arguing
is nothing wrong with being Giannis' sidekick at
not at
all.
all.
Nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about being a sidekick to, first, second, or third best player in the entire world, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Dame's also a guy where you could still argue that he's in the tail end of his prime, but it would be the tail end. He's already seen probably the best that he's going to play, even though he is coming off a season last year where he averaged 32, the most of his career. He's dealt with injuries the last few years. I think he missed about 24, 25 games last year. So he's a guy that's a little bit older. I think now it's time to just really buckle down and try and win a championship. And I think this was his best opportunity to do that.
But does it also concern you a little bit is that it wasn't like Dame wanted to go to Milwaukee. It wasn't like they were his preferred destination because when he made the list of the teams that he wanted to go to, he would have put Milwaukee on that list. Oh, I want to play with Giannis. How do I get to Milwaukee? So does it bother you guys a little bit that it's not ideal? It's a fit for him, of course, but for his it wasn't ideal for him. And you're still putting him in a situation where it wasn't ideal, but we could make it work. You see what I'm saying? So it's like I'm in a better situation than I would be in Miami, but it's not ideal. I wanted to go to Miami.
I feel like it's kind of the same, idea as when the Raptors traded for Kawhi Leonard. It's not his preferred destination, but you go out and get a great player, add him to a great team, and maybe within the year you can win a championship or convince him to stay long term. And that's, they already have Dame locked down in I think 3 more years at least. So you really don't have to worry about him leaving. Now you're just trying to compete for a championship as quick as possible. And I mean, I think the Bucks did a great thing to go out and get him.
But I want to dive into kind of the big piece after Damian Lillard that what happened in this 3-team trade, and that was the departure of Jrue Holiday. Kind of, for better or for worse, they're one of the best perimeter defenders in all of the NBA. I will argue he's number one, but we're not about to argue that. But he moves on to the Boston Celtics, who are, for better or worse, these two are competing for NBA, the opportunity to go to the finals. The Boston Celtics and the Milwaukee Bucks this season, and the last previous seasons. So, what does this do? How does this hinder Milwaukee, and how does this benefit the Celtics, Trask?
Well, after the Bucks acquired Damian Lillard, I was like, okay, I'm all in on the Bucks. They're going to the finals, and then immediately you see, that the Miami Heat and Boston Celtics are going after Jrue Holiday, and I'm thinking if the Celtics get him, they put them right back on the same level as the Bucks. So that's where I'm at with it. That team is extremely deep, one of the deepest in the entire conference. And after the loss of Marcus Smart, and they acquired Kristaps Porzingis throughout the summer, they need another perimeter defender, another ball handler, another experienced player. That's exactly what Jrue Holiday is. I think he's going to come in there. He's going to fit perfectly. Derek White is a guy that can play both point guard and shooting guard positions, as well as Jrue Holiday. So you have a backcourt that can kind of flip back and forth. They're both very good on the defensive end. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, we obviously know what those guys are. You have Kristaps Porzingis now. He gives you a little bit different look than Al Horford. You do lose Robert Williams, who has been, obviously a big part of their defense over the last few years, and Malcolm Brogdon, who was, a six-man of the year contender last season. So it's not like, they aren't going to have their problems as well. But I think this is a team, like I said, that's competing for championships as well this year.
My first thought was, goddamn, Boston insists on having Marcus Smart on their roster in some capacity. This is just a better version of Marcus Smart.
Yeah.
I think there's a decent amount of overlap in their skill sets, and more importantly, what Jrue Holiday is going to be asked to do for Boston. Obviously, we know what he is as a point of attack defender. That's not just going to be on point guards. He's going to guard twos. He's going to probably guard threes, and maybe even, because, Boston prefers to switch fours in a pinch. I can see him sliding up and down those lineups and kind of being a connecting piece. You've got a secondary ball handler, someone who is a better shooter than Marcus Smart in pretty much every capacity. I'm interested in seeing how they utilize Jrue's post-up game, because he's very good with his back to the basket and able to score pretty consistently, being kind of a bigger, stronger guard. And that's not really something that Marcus Smart offered. So interested in seeing how they utilize that. I also in all of the offseason that Boston's had, they came up off Grant Williams, Robert Williams, Malcolm Brogdon, and then obviously Smart. It's they lost a lot in the way of defense. The additions that they made, obviously Jrue Holiday goes a long way in that. I think we can be honest in that I think most people probably weren't watching Washington Wizards basketball last year. As I've already mentioned, I'm a sicko. I watched quite a bit of it, actually. If Boston is getting the Kristaps Porzingis from last season, the one that played in Washington, they will be just fine defensively, and they'll have, a dynamic on offense that I don't know that they've had in recent memory. In a lot of ways, I think Kristaps is going to be to their offense what they were hoping to get from Danilo Gallinari before he tore his ACL last year. And that's a huge dynamic. I will say they're putting a lot on Kristaps' plate and on Al Horford's plate defensively. And I'm very interested in seeing how that works out, because there's definitely a world in which all that goes horribly wrong and they can't get stops. And then, from Milwaukee's perspective, it's a similar deal in that they're going to be asking a lot of Brook Lopez from a rim protection standpoint. And that'll be interesting as well. A few guys that I'm really looking out for on their roster. One in particular, Marjon Beauchamp. Watched a lot of him in summer league. I think he's absolutely ready to, potentially be a rotation guy and contribute, guard multiple positions, provide some secondary ball handling. Uh, Very interested in seeing if that's somebody that they use as a point of attack guy, defensively, maybe to replace some of what they lost in Jrue Holiday. Never going to be one true replacement, but I do envision that being a guy that they kind of go to. Most of all, please, I'm just hoping, please, 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 let us get a Celtics Bucks matchup in the playoffs. Please.
Yeah, and so I wanted to actually touch on that briefly, but I think here's where I'm at with it, and it's no disrespect to Dame, and Dame is a fantastic player. Um, I think from the standpoint of the trade, if you ask me who got better, I think Boston got better. Um, More so than Milwaukee. Now, Milwaukee is fantastic, man. Milwaukee has a two-headed monster, and you could throw Chris Middleton in there and say they have a big three or Brook Lopez, however you want to slice it, whatever. But if you're asking me on paper, who has the better roster, I'm going to lean towards Boston a little more. If you're asking me as far as who won the trade, it's going to sound crazy, but I think Boston won the trade. And there's no disrespect to Dame. I just believe that Jrue Holiday is that big of an impactful player for a team that really needed him. So I think Jrue Holiday does more things for Boston than what Dame is going to do for Milwaukee. And that's not going to say Dame is going to average 30, whatever the case may be. But I do think Jrue is going to bring more. He can score 4 levels. He can score all levels of the basketball. He can play he could defend. He could defend 1 through 3. Sometimes he could defend 1 through 4. He brings a lot that really Milwaukee is going to miss. And Dame doesn't make up for everything that Jrue Holiday has done. Now he's overwhelmingly a better offensive player, and he has a better bag, of course. But when it comes to overall player, I think Jrue impacted the game more than what Dame can do at this stage of his career. And again, that's no slight to Dame at all. I just think that Jrue, for what he's going to bring to Boston, is going to be more impactful than what Dame is going to bring to Milwaukee. And then, having said all that, I wanted to get you guys, quick thoughts. If both of these teams are healthy, who are you going with?
I'd have to see how it looks, throughout the regular season. I think right now I'd probably lean towards the Bucks. I think I think I'm not mad at your take, Danny, that the Celtics were the team that improved more with the Holiday addition, but I think relying on Kristaps Porzingis uh, and Al Horford is something that could come back to bite them at some point, especially as we get towards the playoffs. I just feel like maybe I'm a little bit more confident in what the Bucks are going to have as the season continues. I feel like they kind of saw that Jrue Holiday, as great of a player as he is, and we talked about it the last few years, and Danny, you mentioned it, that he's in that conversation for best perimeter defender in the league. But he's also a guy that was given up, and he wasn't the only one, the team did. But Jimmy Butler absolutely torched him in that first round last year. And Holiday was a guy that really couldn't contain him. So I feel like they kind of decided we already have a pretty good defense. We have Giannis, we have Brook Lopez, a great rim protector. We have Middleton, Crowder, Beauchamp, like you mentioned, Tunde. I feel like he's going to have a big role this season. You already have a solid defense. Let's go get a guy that can put up 30, and we can put the ball in his hands in the closing minutes, which isn't something that Holiday can really do. That's more been Middleton's role the last several years with that Bucks team, and he started to decline a little bit as well. So I think they just have said, let's go get a guy like Dame that we can get the ball to late in the game.
They need a closer.
And really trust him that he's going to be able to bring us this game home. Giannis is the guy that can control the game throughout the game, but in those last 3-4 minutes, he's not a guy that you give the ball to and just get out of his way because of how defensive coverage has kind of changed late in the game. Dame is a guy that you absolutely can do that with, and I think they decided that as much as they like Jrue Holiday and he did help them win that championship, I think he was a little bit more expendable.